Palantir has this model they call the forward deployed engineer. You've been a big proponent of, or sort of have talked about this process a good bit. Maybe you could start off by talking a little bit about why you saw that and sort of how you see it applying to bringing
Yeah.
AI.
I mean, I think for us, it was born out of kind of necessity, right? When we were building early products, engineers were also the salespeople and also the support people. Inevitably, you end up sitting in a video rental store writing code that matched, the situation you just saw, or a convenience store, wherever the customers
Yeah.
were at the time. And so for me, the lesson there was it's very powerful if the folks who are building, right, the product are as intimate as possible with the customer, and not just what the customer says, but what they do and how they do it. And so you end up, being forward deployed means you're, out in the field with customers wherever they are, learning very quickly, right, and iterating very quickly. So that's the basis. Now, as systems get more complex and you end up with more specialized roles, it's hard to bring a huge team on site to do all of that in parallel. But I think the desire to keep teams kind of smaller and closer to the customer is always the most productive possible thing you can do in engagements.
Yeah, one of the things that they talk about, which resonated with me, was this idea that we're at this stage with AI is that nobody knows exactly how to do all these things, and nobody knows, especially as you get into these specialized processes and so on. And they talk about this idea that you sort of got to do something that feels unscalable at first, and then really sort of iterate and try to figure out how to scale it. And so I was just thinking, I don't know, Stu, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on this. I was thinking that there's lessons to be learned for our customers, people that we're working with that are trying to get the most out of AI in terms of how to think about that, just that methodology and how they can use it to spin up these use cases.
I think actually it's a lot of what's happening today. And I think having forward deployed engineers, we used to call them technical consultants or consulting engineers or whatever, but having engineers that are as close to the customer as possible has always been a good idea, in a lot of cases. But I think it becomes more important at the leading edge of certain technology revolutions. And you really saw this in the 90s. This is how I got my early start to my career in the 90s, which was really the start of, let's call it the information revolution. And this is the start of the intelligence revolution. In the 90s, you first had these systems emerge that really allowed all of this information to come together for the first time and for people to communicate in ways that they hadn't been able to do. And you had to go into every business and figure out, well, what did we do with this? And I remember, my very first job out of college was, this guy had written a book, James Champy had written this book called Re-Engineering the Corporation, right? And it was based on this fundamental idea that this was even before the internet was super big. It was more just on the emergence of client server network technologies and how this was every company had to go in and re-engineer how all of its process worked. And what you saw through the 90s and early 2000s was a lot of this forward deployed engineer idea. Like I said, they were called maybe something different then, but you had big teams going into organizations to decompose business processes and figure out how to take advantage of this technology. And the big thriving systems were systems like SAP and or PeopleSoft, CRM, ERP type systems that help bring all of this together. And then what happened as that technology matured over time is more and more of the capabilities got productized. Right. But it got productized because these forward deployed engineers were in the field working with customers with a mindset around let's try to learn lessons and generalize where we can. And over time, systems like SAP, PeopleSoft, CRM, ERP, lessons, lots of stuff eventually got generalized more. It went from you having to code these things specifically to them just being, configuration flags or things like that. I think it's a very similar thing now where this big changes come that allows a very new way of working, allows new things to be deployed, but somebody's got to go in there and figure out how the heck do you take advantage of this stuff. And then ideally, whoever's doing that is also thinking things about things in a very systematic way and trying to generalize problems wherever possible so that the next job is easier. And I think that's what engineers do well, when they're very good. And so I think this idea of having forward deployed engineers is more important now than it has been
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
in a while.